In May of 1973, a group of 8 divers embarked on an exploration of a sinkhole in Australia, since named the Shaft. Unfortunately, their expedition took a horrifying turn. The distribution of population in the state of South Australia is rather peculiar. The city of Adelaide stands as the largest, boasting a population of just over 1 million people. However, the next largest city, Mount Gambier, significantly smaller with only 33,000 residents. This stark contrast makes Mount Gambier over 40 times smaller than the following largest city. Surprisingly, the population of Adelaide surpasses the combined population of all other cities in the state, which is quite unusual. Despite its size, Mount Gambier holds great significance as the primary settlement in the Limestone Coast region. Situated on the border of South Australia and Victoria, it rests a few kilometers north of the southern coast. Interestingly, the city was constructed on the slopes of an actual volcano, aptly named Mount Gambier. Both the city and its surrounding area are renowned for their volcanic features, such as limestone topography, stunning crystal blue lakes, captivating caves, and intriguing sinkholes. Beyond the city limits lie vast stretches of farmland, extending all the way to the southern shores. Among these fields lies a small 5-acre plot known as Thompson's Paddock, owned by dairy farmers. In 1938, a farmer was operating farm equipment on Thompson's paddock, being pulled by his horses, when suddenly one of the horses stumbled over an object hidden in the grass. Intrigued by this peculiar occurrence, the farmer halted his horses, dismounted the equipment, and proceeded to investigate the spot where the horse had tripped. The farmer stumbled upon an unexpected sight: a small hole in the ground, measuring about 1 foot in diameter, that had somehow eluded his notice until now. Curiosity piqued, he lowered himself onto his hands and knees to peer into the hole, only to be taken aback by what he saw. The hole seemed to stretch downward for a staggering distance of at least 20 feet, revealing a pool of water at its depths. This peculiar discovery alone was enough to evoke a sense of awe and unease, but it was merely the beginning of a series of mysteries. It remained unclear how long the farmer had owned the field, or why he had never noticed the hole before. Furthermore, nobody could ascertain whether the horse had inadvertently caused the ground to collapse, or if the hole had always existed, simply escaping the farmer's attention. Regardless of the cause, a pressing question arose. If the horse had indeed triggered the opening of the hole, was there a possibility that it could cave in further, putting the entire vicinity at risk of collapse? To compound matters, the farmer observed that the narrow opening, visible from the surface, extended only a couple of feet before the sides became obscured. It appeared to widen out, resembling an inverted funnel. In a worst-case scenario, one could imagine an unsuspecting individual walking across the field and inadvertently stepping into the opening, plummeting 20 feet into the water below. Due to the shape of the upper section, escape would be impossible, leaving them stranded, treading water, and screaming for help. Understandably alarmed by this realization, the farmer resolved to fill the pit with rocks. Over the following days, he diligently brought soccer ball-sized stones to the opening, dropping them into the watery abyss below. The rocks were dropped one by one, causing a significant splash before vanishing into the depths of the dark water, never to be seen again. Initially, the farmer disposed of the first dozen rocks, only to witness their disappearance. Frustrated, he proceeded to dump several dozen more into the water. However, even after the dozens turned into hundreds, there was still no sign of the rocks beneath the surface. The farmer persisted, eventually discarding thousands of rocks into the enigmatic opening, yet not a single one could be observed in the water. It seemed as though the hole had no bottom. Consequently, the farmer had no choice but to exercise caution around the opening, hoping it wouldn't collapse any further. Predictably, news of this peculiar phenomenon spread, attracting curious individuals who sought to explore the hole. Eventually, it was determined to be a limestone sinkhole, formed by the gradual dissolution of rocks beneath, resulting in a sizable opening just a few feet below the surface. Over time, the foot-wide hole was widened to approximately 3 feet, or 1 meter, facilitating easier exploration. Then, in the mid-1960s, a diver was lowered into the cave opening for the first time. Descending 23 feet from the surface, he finally reached the water's surface and discovered that it resembled more of a small lake than anything else. Below the entrance, the space was narrow, but as you reach the water's surface, the room expands to a width of 56 feet. Moreover, on a sunny day around noon, sunlight directly penetrates the opening, casting a vibrant sapphire blue beam of light that illuminates both the room and the water. This phenomenon led to the cave being named the Shaft, due to the presence of this striking shaft of light. As the diver descended into the cave below the water's surface, he discovered that it continued to widen the deeper he went. During the initial exploration, he reached a depth of approximately 69 feet before deciding to end the dive and resurface. However, the most peculiar aspect was that from his stopping point, he could observe all the rocks that had been dumped into the cave years ago. These numerous rocks resembled a small anthill at the bottom of this vast chamber. Subsequently, the cave was mapped, revealing a massive central chamber where the rocks were located, along with two remarkably deep descending arms that extended in nearly opposite directions. The primary chamber measures 460 feet in length and 260 feet in width at its widest point, with the top of the rock pile situated 118 feet below the surface. From the main chamber, there is a tunnel that extends northwest to a depth of 260 feet, and on the opposite side, another tunnel stretches all the way down to 407 feet. It is believed that these tunnels may extend all the way to the southern shores, forming part of the intricate freshwater drainage system that flows through the surrounding mountains. Additionally, each of these corridors features several cliffs, overhangs, and narrow passages, adding intriguing characteristics to the journey downward. The combination of these characteristics, along with the exceptionally clear water and the extensive network of tunnels to explore, make it an ideal destination for avid cave explorers. It is worth noting that a comprehensive and accurate map of the cave was not created until 1984. However, as early as 1973, many dives had already been conducted in the shaft. Despite these numerous dives, the true depth of the cave remained unknown, and a complete map had not yet been produced. Consequently, the cave was widely regarded as seemingly bottomless. Due to the relative novelty of cave diving at the time and the limitations of the available equipment, divers would typically venture to the edge of the mapped area and gaze into the abyss, pondering the unfathomable depth of the cave. In May 1973, a team of 9 divers embarked on what they believed could potentially be a record-breaking dive in the shaft. On the 26th of that month, they arrived in Mount Gambier and established their camp near the renowned Blue Crater Lake. Their objective was to reach the perimeter of the shaft, located at a depth of 250 feet. Beyond this point, the angle of the cave ceiling obstructs the light, resulting in near total darkness. Coincidentally, this area also coincided with the drop-off, a section of the cave where the bottom is no longer visible from the edge above. The shaft gained its reputation for being bottomless due to the fact that when standing at the ledge, one cannot see anything below, yet it clearly extends much further. All 9 of the divers who intended to undertake this challenge were dive instructors. However, since it was a rather ambitious endeavor, they planned to conduct a practice dive and set up some equipment before their actual attempt. Therefore, on the following day, the 27th, they arrived at the farmhouse on Thompson's Paddock, signed the guest book, and proceeded to the grassy field where the entrance was situated. They parked their vehicles beside the opening and proceeded to assemble the well-known tripod hoist system, which many are likely familiar with. This hoist is utilized to lower the divers into the water below. Remarkably, despite being widened, the hole is still too narrow for the divers to descend while wearing their equipment, which must be lowered separately. Additionally, a wire ladder is set up for the divers to ascend and exit the water. Once everyone was in the water, they were astonished to discover the vast size of the room at the surface. Subsequently, they arranged a shot line, which was the primary task for the day. This line weighted and anchored at the surface, led directly down to the rock pile. It would facilitate their descent during the record attempt and provide them with more time to reach the edge. On the practice day, they reached the depth of approximately 200 feet, which was just around the perimeter of the rock pile and well within the illumination of the opening. However, while they were submerged, they caught a glimpse of the renowned edge in the distance, which was their ultimate objective. After completing their practice dive and familiarizing themselves with the cave, they returned to Mount Gambier to replace their light batteries and refill their air cylinders. The following day, on the 28th, they gathered at the entrance at noon, fully equipped and ready to descend once again. However, one of the divers, Joan, opted not to join them, reducing their group to 8 individuals. Joan decided to remain above ground, assisting with supplies and preparing meals for the rest of the team. The remaining divers, Robert, John, Peter, Gordon, Larry, and the 3 siblings, Glenn, Stephen, and Christine, descended to the rock pile at a depth of 130 feet before continuing towards the tunnel where the ledge was located. Around 180 feet, Robert began experiencing the effects of nitrogen narcosis, a condition caused by the dissolving of nitrogen from the breathing gas in the bloodstream, resulting in impaired and intoxicated sensations. Although this occurred slightly earlier than usual for Robert, it was significant enough for him to realize that he needed to ascend slightly to alleviate the symptoms. At that time, diving and cave diving were relatively new activities, and the established protocols we have today were not yet in place. Many inexperienced individuals participated in these activities, including the divers in question, who, despite being instructors, only had experience in clear and bright open water. Additionally, there was no requirement for cave certification, allowing anyone to dive in caves with minimal oversight. However, the most concerning aspect was the safety protocols were drastically different compared to the present day. This particular group of divers had planned to descend to a depth of 250 feet using regular air, which is incredibly reckless if you have any knowledge of diving. Nowadays, it is recommended to limit the use of regular air to a maximum depth of just 130 feet. Beyond that point, nitrogen narcosis sets in and can impair both judgment and motor function. At approximately 185 feet, the air becomes toxic and can even trigger convulsive seizures in certain cases. If a seizure were to occur at such depths, the diver's mouthpiece would simply fall out, leading to a tragic drowning incident. Considering all these factors, there were already 8 divers in the water using regular air, and they had already reached a depth of 180 feet. Robert signaled to the others that he was returning to the rock pile, while they signaled back that they would continue. He then swam around the rock pile, carefully inspecting the area for any animal bones that may have sunk to the bottom. After about 8 minutes, he noticed Glenn's torch approaching him. At this point, Robert was running low on air, and Glenn, who had been monitoring his gauges, was in a similar situation. The two of them caught up with each other and resurfaced almost simultaneously. Shortly after, Larry also surfaced, followed by Peter just 30 seconds later, who had practically run out of air. Peter mentioned that he hadn't seen any of the other divers. Suddenly, a wave of panic washed over everyone as they realized the gravity of the situation. This was especially true for Glenn, whose brother and sister were still submerged in the water with very little air left. Just a few minutes earlier, the group had continued their dive without Robert, swimming and capturing pictures until they reached a depth of approximately 200 feet. Glenn and the others were swimming along a ledge at the bottom when he noticed his sister just a few feet away. Everything seemed normal at first, with the bright light above, and only 5 minutes having passed since they began their dive. However, Glenn started feeling groggy due to narcosis and decided it was time to turn back. Checking his gauges, he realized his air supply was running low, and he assumed the others were in the same situation. As a precaution, he planned to signal his sister, Christine, to indicate that she should also ascend. Before he could tap her on the shoulder, she began swimming away from him, out of his reach. Not wanting to waste any more time, Glenn assumed the rest of the group would follow him soon and started making his way to the surface. There, he reunited with Robert, and the two surfaced together. It was at this moment that chaos erupted in the cave, and a combination of factors led to what could potentially be the deadliest cave diving incident in history. Just before Glenn began his ascent, Peter, also affected by narcosis, wanted to check Glenn's depth gauge. However, Glenn started ascending before Peter could read it. Peter remained seated for a brief moment, observing the crystal clear water below. Suddenly, he noticed 2 fellow divers making their way towards the exit. Concerned about his remaining air supply, he quickly assessed the situation and realized that time was running out. With a sense of urgency, he turned towards what he believed to be the exit only to discover that the cave had plunged into darkness. To make matters worse, he had no clue which direction led to the exit. Earlier that day, as the group ventured into the cave, clouds had rolled in, obstructing the natural light that once illuminated the area. Determined to find the way out, Peter began to swim around, desperately searching for the exit. However, within a matter of moments, the once clear waters became clouded with sediment, causing the divers to become disoriented and scattered. Unbeknownst to them, 3 of the divers had unintentionally gathered near the deepest part of the cave they had explored. Christine led the group, followed by Gordon, with Larry bringing up the rear. As Larry and Gordon checked their gauges, they realized that their air supply was dangerously low. Signaling to Christine, they indicated that it was time to ascend. In a state of panic, the 3 divers began swimming almost directly upwards, neglecting the diagonal path along the cave ceiling. These limestone caves were known to have dome-shaped depressions in the ceiling, where fragments of rock occasionally detached and fell. It is believed that the gases expelled by the divers had accumulated in one of these pockets, resulting in a reflective surface on the ceiling that resembled the area near the entrance. In their impaired state, their flashlights reflected off this surface, leading them to believe they were swimming in the correct direction. Consequently, they swam upwards and collided with the ceiling directly above them. Gordon and Christine, filled with terror, frantically waved their flashlights, desperately searching for an exit. At that moment, Larry's light suddenly went out. He momentarily descended from the ceiling, and miraculously, it turned back on. Due to his descent, he spotted another diver in the distance. Larry swam towards the diver, and at the right angle, managed to catch sight of the actual entrance far ahead. He swiftly made his way towards the entrance and resurfaced around the same time as Glenn and Robert. Peter, too, successfully navigated his way out of the silt and surfaced shortly after Larry. Upon realizing that 4 individuals, including his brother and sister, were still missing, Glenn promptly grabbed a spare tank and dove back down in an attempt to locate them. He reached the edge of the cliff at a depth of 225 feet and discovered his brother's flashlight and camera resting on the seabed. However, any further exploration was hindered by the complete siltation and zero visibility. Driven by his desperate desire to find his siblings, Glenn ventured beyond the drop-off and into the silt. As soon as he entered the clouded area, he could not even see his own hand in front of his face, causing him to panic. He immediately swam back towards the edge of the rock pile and stared into the abyss for a considerable amount of time, hoping to catch any sign of them. Eventually, he was compelled to resurface. Peter descended following Glenn's return, yet his search yielded no results. At that moment, an ambulance had arrived, and it became evident to everyone that there was no hope of finding any survivors. Shortly thereafter, the police arrived and made plans for the recovery of the bodies the following day. On the subsequent day, police divers ventured into the shaft, reaching a depth of 200 feet. However, they discovered that the cave remained incredibly treacherous. They had already reached the limits of their capabilities and were unable to locate any of the bodies during that day's search, nor during a subsequent search the day after. Following the second search, the police decided to suspend the operation entirely until they could receive additional training from the Navy. The depth of the recovery mission was groundbreaking and stretched the boundaries of their current training. It would take several months, at the very least, to adequately prepare their recovery team. In January of the following year, before the bodies had been recovered, the landowners granted permission for a film crew, who were producing a documentary on cave diving, to enter the cave and film. The crew had already documented several other locations in the area and were eager to include the shaft. On the 22nd, they descended to a depth of approximately 50 feet and, utilizing professional lighting equipment, illuminated the cave to such an extent that it resembled daylight inside. While they were setting up, a technician noted what appeared to be a third person behind 2 of his teammates. This discovery startled them, prompting them to investigate the area further. It was then that they realized it was a body clad in a wetsuit. Immediately ceasing all filming, they surfaced and promptly contacted the police to inform them of their find. The following day, the police successfully retrieved the body, which was wedged between a narrow ledge just 50 feet below the water's surface. On the same day, they descended to a depth of 180 feet, but were unsuccessful in locating any of the remaining individuals. The only one they managed to retrieve was later identified as Stephen, one of the siblings. By March of that year, the landowners grew increasingly uneasy about the presence of 3 people still trapped in the cave, prompting them to seek assistance from more experienced divers equipped with better gear. On March 9, 1974, this team of divers embarked on their own search and discovered a person lying on their back at a depth of 185 feet at the bottom of the cave. They also found another individual directly beneath them, further down 20 feet deeper. They located the final person, John, beneath a rock ledge. Due to the depth and the way the body was wedged, it took until April, a month later, to recover his remains. It is believed that Christine and Gordon, almost a year prior on that fateful day, had exhausted their air supply while in a dome-shaped pocket on the ceiling. It had been suggested that they died embracing each other, aware of their dire situation and unable to do anything about it. This explains why their bodies were found in such close proximity. The exact identity of the diver who spotted John remains unclear, although one of the survivors mentioned witnessing another diver swimming forcefully and deeper into the cave while everyone else was returning to the surface. John, who was discovered at the deepest point, is believed to have been severely affected by nitrogen narcosis, causing him to swim in the opposite direction. Limited information is available regarding Stephen's final moments. Interestingly, he was found much higher than the others, clinging to the ceiling instead of being at the bottom. Upon discovery, his buoyancy device was inflated, keeping him afloat and attached to the roof. It is possible that in the darkness and silt, he attempted to locate the exit by floating towards the ceiling and crawling along it. However, he may have exhausted his air supply before reaching safety. Unfortunately, since there were no witnesses, his exact final moments will forever remain unknown. The shaft disaster stands as one of the most tragic incidents in the history of cave diving. As a result, the Cave Divers Association of Australia was established in September 1973, aiming to regulate the industry and prevent future tragedies. With the benefit of hindsight, it is clear that these divers should not have entered the cave without proper knowledge of cave diving. Criticism can also be directed towards their use of regular air instead of specialized gas mixtures. But during that time, such mixtures were not widely accessible. Additionally, they should have utilized guidelines to navigate uncharted sections and avoid getting lost in the event of silt or darkness. Interestingly, the divers were aware of the importance of guidelines but chose not to use them due to the large size of their group, fearing potential entanglement and increased danger. In reality, for a dive of this nature, a smaller group should have been formed to ensure the use of guidelines. Fortunately, thanks to the establishment of the CDAA and similar organizations, the number of cave dive fatalities has significantly decreased over the years.